Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast. I'm your host, Jess Root from CardsWire.com, the Arizona Cardinals site from the USA Today NFL Wire. And on episode 340, as we're recording on a Tuesday night, Seth Cox from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, the Arizona Cardinals site from SB Nation, and the host of the original Draft Breakdown podcast. Seth is back with us after some time off. We had a good show with Blake last week. How are things going as we start the new year, Seth?
Going well, man. I mean, it's been busy with the holidays, and then a little vacation with the wife, and now just getting ready for what looks like a late, I guess, middle to late January Cardinal season, which is, different than what we're used to.
Yeah, it's something that we're fantastic to see, especially considering, the years that we've had before. And it feels like, guess what? All they needed to do was just finally get to January, because December was kind of atrocious, and they got better. After 3 games in a row, losing, not looking good, they looked good. They beat the Dallas Cowboys 25-22, and that's kind of what we're going to start with in this show. We're going to take a look at the win. We're going to take a look at the win. What was the best part? We'll look at, because the Cardinals also had a number of unexpected contributions in that game because of the number of players who were out. Discuss, have they found the way? Have they fixed things? Look at playoff scenarios. What do we want to see? And then we're going to look at their regular season finale, a matchup in Week 18 at home against the Seattle Seahawks. Let's get started with the win over the Cowboys, 25-22. For you, what was the best part of that win?
I think the best part of the win was the win. I mean, obviously, there were individual performances. There was a team performance. There was, redemption for certain players. All of that played into a lot of positive coming out of this. But I think the unequivocal best thing that happened in this game was that they won. And why? Well, winning cures all. At the end of the day, you can be a flawed team that wins, or you can be who you are and lose. And the Cardinals, with the injuries they have right now, are a flawed team that just hasn't been able to win. And they rode the script that you and I've discussed ad nauseum on this show.
Get a stop, get some points, get a stop, get more points, and roll.
And they were able to do that again, and then hold on. And then at the end of the game, you saw some maturation from, Kyler, from Cliff. You saw some things that were good to see on top of everything else. But at the end, you also saw a win. And that was just something that, they had one win in December. They just have not looked right the last couple of weeks. And now they've put themselves in a position where, yes, it's going to take help, but they could possibly still win the NFC West, get a 2 seed or 3 seed in the NFC playoffs. Again, going to take some help, but doesn't mean that it's impossible. And that's just something, that we haven't seen, after only 2 wins in November and then 1 win in December, to already have 1 win in January with a good chance to have 2 wins in January going into the playoffs it's just important.
Yeah, absolutely. And there were lots of things for me that I liked. I liked the way they started, and I liked the way they ended in particular. And I was real impressed with the way several players stepped up and filled in roles that they're typically not used to having. But let's start off with the start. They got a stop early. They were great against the run. Then they got points, and then the other part when Dallas was threatening and they were starting to get going because they do have the number one offense in the NFL. They made it interesting. The Cardinals killed the clock. They didn't give the ball back, which was absolutely so. You love how they started, and you loved how they finished, and I just think that's the sort of thing that gets things right. They had some adversity, missing Marcus Golden and Devon Kennard and DJ Humphries already down, Robert Alford and Marco Wilson and J.J. Watt and DeAndre Hopkins and James Conner and Rondell White. So these are all guys that they expect to contribute who weren't available. And guys stepped up. That next man up mentality was on display. I also really liked how Kyler kind of took things over. I know he said all year, dating back to last year in the offseason, that he wants his legs to be a luxury. This is the time of the year when he needs to incorporate that more, especially when they're lacking in some talent and some playmakers. He's got to be that guy. And he's picking and choosing his moments, and it makes this team super hard to defend, especially late in games when, they're trying to kill the clock and trying to run the ball. But it's really hard to key on a running back and a quarterback who can make it look like he's passing and then can just take off. And so I thought that Kyler showed some really good maturity managing the game down the stretch. There was no panic when they got back within 3, and they just ate the clock. And I think there were things that you really liked as well, because there were some nice coaching decisions in there. The fake punt worked out, and the way that they were able to make Dallas burn a timeout by having the offense and the kicker on the field at the same time, that ultimately made the difference at the end for running the clock out. But there was a lot to like to me, because they kind of played well in all phases. Matt Prater bounced back from an awful game against the Colts, and it's amazing how much better he looks when Andy Lee is holding.
Yeah, and Aaron Brewer snapping. And that was, that's the thing, is like, you look at the game itself, and there were just so many positives coming out of the game. You look at it, the defense held the number one offense in the NFL. I mean, they ended up putting up some decent yardage statistics, but most of those came in the fourth quarter in trying to mount a comeback. That was too little too late. You had timely big plays from guys that were struggling. And I pointed this out during the game. Isaiah Simmons was not having a good game. He had missed some open field tackles. He had taken some bad angles. He had gotten washed out in some of the run game. And for him to, take on Zeke Elliott head to head in that block, get off the block, and then kind of nearly make that sack, isn't that kind of the Isaiah Simmons story, right? Like, you're like, oh, here's this athlete and this, ferocious hitter, and then, he's just not quite at that football playmaking ability yet.
But he's so good at punching the ball out. Like, there's been a lot of times it hasn't mattered because on the sideline. Simmons is incredibly good at punching the ball out.
And then you just watch it, and he was able to recover and go make a play on the ball that was massive and I would say game changing, because that was when the Cowboys kind of had their mojo, right? Like they were all of a sudden, they had just scored to cut it to 22-14. And then they forced just a really, that was like the worst series of the game for the Cardinals, I believe, right after that. I think that was the one where they had the minus 18 yards.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, so they score, and then all of a sudden, oh crap. And then the Cardinals punt, and then you get a big 26-yard completion on the first play to CD Lamb, and you're like, here. Because that's the thing. You and I can, you know, objectively sit back and talk about it. And the reality is, Dallas's offense is phenomenal. Their weak point now, which is ironic, is their offensive line, but their skill positions. I mean, they may be the best offense skill position wise in the league. Losing Gallup obviously hurt. That was that, and a bad break. I mean, you hate to see anybody get injured. Um, you know, but to have Simmons force that fumble to get it to recover it, because how many plays had they not made in that game? And that was something that you and I both were tweeting out during the game. It's like they need one of those. When the ball hits the ground, they need to make a play one time, and they just had not done it. All game long. It was like it was there. They could have made a play, and they just
Well, like the Chandler Jones one where he knocks the ball out and Dak just picks it back up and completes the pass.
And then you've got a couple missed interceptions and just
geez.
little simple things, and you're just like, and then you go, that's this team, right? Like, they're just that close. I mean, think about it. Like, the missed interceptions, the missed fumbles, those little things.
They're what keep opponents in the game.
They're what keep opponents in the game, and they're also what make it. Remember, it was, what was it? It was 10-0, or is it 13-0 when it was 10-0? Sorry, yeah, when Dallas had the PI that negated the interception, and then another PI that one was kind of but and all of a sudden you're shooting yourself in the foot, and then they score a touchdown, and you're like, oh crap, and then you talk about things that you liked, what you saw. All of a sudden, Cliff and Kyler were in sync again, and they go down and get a quick field goal to end the half. We haven't seen that in a while, right?
Yeah, they managed the end of the half. So that was another thing, because where the Cardinals, in their success, have managed the halves well. And so they had a great start. They picked up points, so they picked up some cheap points at the end of the half with some good clock management. And then finished.
And then they come out in the second half, and that's been another bugaboo. That's where Kyler, I think he's thrown four
third quarter interceptions, something like that.
Yeah, on the first drive, and you look at it, and he comes out in 75 yards, over 5 minutes, touchdown, and you're like, okay. Like, their 2 touchdown drives, and it was only 2. They had the what was that, 4 field goals on the day.
Yeah,
their 2 touchdown drives were kind of what we've been waiting for from an impressive standpoint, right? Like 91 yards over 8 minutes for the first one, 75 yards over 5 minutes for the second one. Like, that's what we've been missing. One of the things that we talked about early in the season, and the games looked like this, but instead of those field goals, they were getting touchdowns.
Yeah,
where they were going 70 plus yards and then scoring a touchdown. The 40 yards right before the half to get a field goal. That's okay. You're fine with that. Nobody cares. But it's those 78-yard drives that you end up with a field goal. Those are the ones that start to hurt a little bit. And for them, to overcome all of that, and then come out and play defense the way they did in this game. I mean, those are just important things that we haven't seen from this team in 3 weeks.
Yep, absolutely. Coming up next on our Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk. Let's move on and talk about the surprise contributors. There were quite a bit. We'll talk about them, what that meant to the team. That's coming up next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. You go up and down kind of the box score, and the playmakers were not the regular guys. So obviously there are some names. You got Kyler Murray, had a great game. You had Matt Prater, who was automatics. Isaiah Simmons played extremely well. But here's kind of the list of players whose performance was key in the victory. Greg Dortch, who thought that he would come out and open the game with a 24-yard run, have a 10-yard catch later. Antoine Wesley, 2 touchdown receptions. Kelvin Beachum at left tackle. Josh Jones, honestly, the penalties are maddening, but he held up pretty well at right tackle overall.
Yeah, and not a conversation I want to get into, but when you did your snap count stuff, were you actually surprised that Dimikage played more than Collins? Because I thought Collins played very well in his what seemed like more snaps than he played.
Well, actually, I'm not surprised because that's his position as opposed to. But it was really interesting how they made sure that Zaven started the game because
and it seemed like Zaven was out there more. I don't think that Victor did anything wrong. It's just he didn't make any plays.
No, he didn't. Zaven did a couple,
and Zaven had a couple. So I think you noticed him out there more.
Yeah, well, like as I was paying attention to the game, I was like, he doesn't seem to be out there. But it was like they gave him a starting role, but used him sparingly, which kind of vibes with how they've been handling him this year. Don't give him too much. So give him some success and get him out.
But yeah, so it was. I mean, it's always good to see that, and you look at it like you said. You had Antonio Hamilton played pretty well in the game. I mean, Zaven Collins had some success. Lecky Fotu didn't look bad at times. They brought it up on the broadcast, and I think it's something that we don't talk about enough. And when we talk about the need at certain positions, one of the things that you clearly see that this team needs is help along the defensive line.
And Zach Allen, who's playing a bunch of snaps when he's clearly banged up, like he's barely practicing. But they need him. They need him. That's the thing.
And he comes out and gives you. He's clearly not as good as J.J. Watt, but he gives you that same type of energy and effort. He just doesn't have, the same skill. And so that, it doesn't show up on the stat sheet in the same way. But the things he does to, stay alive and stay moving forward in games is just so impressive. And I don't think enough can be talked about it when you said, like, he's not healthy and he's really getting not a lot of help along the defensive line, especially in the pass rush situation. I mean, their interior defensive line, and I know people are disillusioned with him, but they desperately miss Jordan Phillips in pass rushing situations.
Yep.
Obviously it's a lot different when JJ is there, and then you have a healthy Watt, Allen, and Jones, and then you can put Marcus Golden over there. So when you have those four, you don't miss Jordan Phillips, but Jordan Phillips gives them another pass rusher. Obviously not as good as Watt, but he gives them more than anybody else on the team.
Absolutely, and it ended up being a catch. Just the fact that they made the call on that fake punt, that catch by Ward was absolutely insane. I don't know how he did it. I mean, ultimately it didn't matter if he made the catch because it was a pass interference and it would have gotten the ball at the same spot with the first down. But, seeing guys like Jonathan Ward make plays and Chris Banjo making plays in big moments, that's what galvanizes a team that's trying to kind of get back on track.
100%. And, it's the little things, like you said, the Dortch carry to start the game, Darrell Daniels as a lead blocker throughout the game. You look at AJ Green and Antoine Wesley, and they're blocking on the perimeter to close out the game. You mentioned Kyler and Chase and the speed option game that they were running, but I mean those plays don't happen without very solid blocking by your wide receivers. And the Cardinals have been spoiled for a long time between Fitz and Michael Floyd with big physical wide receivers that can block. And it really has kind of gotten lost in the shuffle. And it's not, it's not a shot at like a John Brown or a DeAndre Hopkins or any of those guys, but to see Green and Wesley really putting that effort in and that energy into the blocking was, I thought, impressive as well.
Antoine Wesley, an interesting guy. I think someone said it perfectly. It's kind of asked me on Twitter if Wesley is kind of what we wanted Hakeem Butler to be. I'm like, oh, absolutely. Except that he doesn't have
he's not an athletic guy.
Right. He's got the length, but he didn't have the strength or the speed. But
right.
he's doing better than Butler ever did.
Well, and this is something that we talk about a lot. And obviously I don't want to oversell this. But, one of the reasons people struggled with like a DK Metcalf is because you've got DK who's so big and physical and you wonder, like, can he run routes consistently?
Because he didn't. That's one thing he has overcome because the tape showed that he had a limited route tree. He didn't have great agility. He had the speed. He had the physicality. He had a major injury concern with the neck. And so I get why people didn't value him as much as potentially they could have. But, to his credit, he's overcome all that. He has improved and turned into one of the best receivers in the game.
And so you look at it and you've got a guy in the same type of vein. Now, obviously not as big and athletic as DK, but you had a guy in a similar style, Hakeem Butler, and you say, okay, well, can this guy turn into that type of player? And no, he just didn't. But then you look at Antoine Wesley, and quite frankly, I don't even know what Wesley ran as a.
I think it was a 4.6, if I recall.
Yeah, so he's a. Obviously it's relative, but he's a slug. He's not a burner. He's not a guy. So he's a guy that has to run good routes. Because if he doesn't run good routes, guess what? He's not going to ever get open. And he's a contested catch guy, so he's got to catch the ball. And he had a drop in the game, so it's not like he's
No. There's you see sometimes where you miss Hopkins because he doesn't have the strong hands.
Right, and so, but you look at it, and he's a guy that is playing outside of his probably ability, and he's finding ways to be successful in it. And like you said, the big thing for him right now are those contested catches, and then his ability to assist in the run game. And that's not something that you think of when you think of wide receivers, but the reality is that's where he's at right now. Yeah, dude, he was a 4.68. Holy cow. That is not great.
Well, one of the things, so I know there's some talk about from Cardinals fans about what you could count on for Wesley next year. He's definitely, I wouldn't want to count on him as a wide receiver too.
No,
I'm completely comfortable at this point as him coming in as projecting him as their wide receiver 4, though. Say they don't bring back AJ Green and they re-sign Christian Kirk. That gives you Kirk, who can play inside and outside. You've got Rondale Moore in the slot, and then you've got Wesley, who can play outside, out the Z when they go with 4 wides. And you've seen that he's capable. He's definitely not dynamic, but he's capable of playing the X.
Well, and you do wonder if he could take over those routes that we've seen from AJ this year.
Right.
And so, like you said, he's playing the X position. AJ plays the Z.
But I'd become perfectly comfortable as projecting him as like if they
as your number 4,
right? Especially like if they decide not to bring back Green. I think I kind of get the vibe that Cliff would like AJ to be back next year, and I think he would ideally like to keep his receiving core intact.
Well, I mean, can you blame him?
Because as frustrating as AJ has been this year, the production's there. You look at the numbers he's had. Did
Well,
we?
there's just, I mean, there's certain things that AJ Green's not anymore, and that's, I think for a lot of fans, that's what the frustration is. And I mean, this is the dirty little secret, but I mean, we watched Larry Fitzgerald not make plays that he used to make, right? Like,
Wait, he's got.
and so when Fitz was lacking in that athleticism or the ability to go get a ball anymore, it's hard to watch. But as Cardinals fans, it's a lot easier to get upset with.
Right, he's got 825 receiving yards, which is the most that he's had since 2017.
Yeah,
and you feel like they haven't utilized him. I completely agree with Cliff said they haven't utilized him to their. They've really kept him. Maybe it's because it's year one in the system. They've kept him really kind of limited in the types of routes that he runs.
Well, and he's averaging a ridiculous 6.5 yards per reception,
and that's the thing. He can't run anymore.
no. I mean, you think about some. I mean, for every one where Kyler underthrows him a little bit, think about the ones where Kyler put it right on him and he had 3 steps and then got run down.
Yeah, the Christmas game. He got that. He beat the guy down the field, and he just and that was the thing I tweeted. Like, if only AJ could still run. But I mean, you saw what he did to Trayvon Diggs with his routes. He completely roasted him, and Kyler was good, and was good with the ball placement, so he didn't recover. But I'm super happy about Wesley because we kind of all in our group chat. We always felt that Wesley was going to be a target for Cliff Kingsbury. And, it looks like from what Cliff said is that Keim finally kind of relented and says, all right, we'll just bring this dude in. And it's worked out. He knows the offense. Cliff knows what he can do. And that's I'm not saying he's going to be a star, but he's a nice story for this roster because he's playing DeAndre Hopkins' spot. I mean, how hard is that?
Right, and like you said, it'd be a lot different if you're counting on him moving forward to be that number 2 like he is right now, or that number 3 like they're asking him to be right now. That's not the plan. Like if he's your 2 or 3, then yeah, you're not a good receiving core. But if he's your 4, if he's the guy that comes in, and you slide Christian into the slot, and then you bring, like you said, you bring Wesley in to play the Z to replace AJ Green. Okay, everybody's okay with that. I told you, I mean, it's funny, and obviously we're a long ways away from this conversation, but it's funny because there's the perfect wide receiver for the Arizona Cardinals offense in this year's draft. But we'll have to wait and see if that gets closer.
Yeah, coming up next on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, FSR of Cardinals Talk on the Web. Let's move on and talk about, have the Cardinals found their way? Did they fix things with the win? What can we expect from the Cardinals moving forward? That's coming up next on Rise Up C-Red. We're back on the Rise Up C-Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals Talk on the web. It sort of felt that they got their mojo back. Now, Cliff said, he doesn't think about that. He's like, they finally put together a good win. They've been practicing well, but let's be honest. Their defense hadn't been that great. Their defense was really good. Their offense has been hit and miss. They weren't perfect by any means, but in the red zone, as Josh Jones again had those untimely penalties that kind of ruined a couple of potential touchdown drives. But it kind of feels like they're getting back to what they're doing, and the run defense was spectacular, and it was in a nutshell because they got a lead. They used numbers and got a lead and kept the Cowboys from being able to be balanced offensively. And so that's been the Cardinals' recipe. That's their keys to success pretty much every week. But it feels like they got back on track, like the kind of the doldrums they were in. Maybe it was missing some guys so that it sharpened the focus of some of the lesser contributors that led to them playing better. But, I'm not ready to say that they fixed everything, but it's the right time to do it.
Yeah, and it's the right time to get back in the win column and get back in your kind of winning ways, and that those are the things that they're going to have to do over the next, well, I guess one game, right?
One game plus one. I mean,
Yeah, but there, that's what you wanted to see this week against Dallas, and then obviously next week when they when they host Seattle in the final game, because that's the thing is that they, and Kyler said this, outside of Detroit and then before that Carolina, it's not like they were blown out, right? Like they just made too many mistakes.
yeah, yeah, things got away from them. Yeah, and they got things got away from them because they turned the ball over essentially.
Right. And so now you look at it and they've got a chance to really uh get back into the swing of things. They've got a chance to be one of the best teams in the NFL, and at, as the season ends, that's where you want to be. You want to be one of the teams going up at the right time, not one of the teams that's floundering or backing their way into the playoffs. And that's where they were a week ago, right? They
Oh,
were,
and this is so good to kind of get that narrative away for right now. Because if they'd have lost another one, it would have been unbearable. You know, the Cardinals can't close. Cliff Kingsbury is he the prop? No, it getting a win, as we said in the last couple of shows, getting a win fixes things because getting wins against quality teams like the Cowboys. Now, I will say this: their 4-game winning streak wasn't all that they made it out to be, considering the quarterbacks they were playing. But
right. It's not like they were beating, Green Bay
no,
and Tampa Bay and
but they were beating teams they were supposed to beat, and
the Cardinals weren't, and that
right.
was and that's the big difference. And we go back to it. Should they have beaten Indianapolis? I don't know. I mean,
built 7 points of kicks. Yeah, they should have.
The only game that you look at that you're like, this is a team that they should have beaten was Detroit, but from the way they were playing, there were other games that they had a chance to win and were not able to. And so that's where you come with those ideas or saying, that type of stuff. But this gets them on the right track of the sense of like, hey, this is how we win, right? Remember winning, remember what winning felt like? Like that's a big thing. My kid joked about it, but a lot of it could have been, and maybe it was, they didn't have the pressure of they had to win. I mean, and maybe, if that's a problem and it shows up in the playoffs, it is what it is. But like, they didn't have to win to clinch. They'd already clinched. And now all of a sudden they just, go out and play football again and they play loose and free and they have some fun. And you see it on their faces and you see it in the game. And that was, it'd been a while since we've seen that.
Well, they talk about how they come out flat. I don't think it's a matter of like effort or flat, but they have juice when they're successful. It's not like Kyler's pouting because of the team. He's pissed at himself. But when he's playing well, there's some wild energy on that team. And it feels what's great is that they got right offensively. It wasn't perfect. They still, they got to be better in the red zone. They got to finish the deal. They can't have those penalties. So, but it got better throughout the game. And then defensively, they were fantastic overall. I mean, you go against the number one offense, you're not going to stop them the whole game. But the concerns about the rush defense, they've been great. In fact, over the last several games, their yards per carry allowed is only 3.7. They've been very strong against the run game when they've needed to be. As we've talked before, where they get in trouble with the run defense is if they're not winning and the teams are able to stay around and stay balanced. They don't have the elite defense to stop both the run and the pass at the same time.
No, and that's the thing is like we've talked about it. This is a team built similar to those Indianapolis Colts teams with Peyton Manning, and that's how they're going to have to win games. They're going to have to win games being able to play from ahead, as you just said, and that's. It's not always the best way, right? But it is a way to.
It's win. A proven. That's how the Chiefs did it.
I was gonna say we've seen the Chiefs do it. We've seen the Patriots do it a couple times. So yeah, it's nice to have a well-rounded team or a team that can play multiple types of games. And the Cardinals have, let's be honest, they have played multiple types of games, but they're at their best when they're playing from ahead and they're able to, like you said, focus on stopping the pass and daring teams to run the football down 10 plus.
Coming up next on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk. And let's move on and talk some more about the playoffs. The Cardinals have a number of scenarios they can end up in. They could be a wild card team. They could win the division. We'll break it down, what we're hoping to see. That's coming next on Rise Up Sea Red. We're back on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. The Cardinals, with their win, they are still a game behind the Rams, but can win the division. And kind of how we know it goes is that the Cardinals can be the number 2 seed, the number 3 seed, or the number 5 seed is how that goes. So if the Rams win, beat the 49ers, or the Cardinals lose to Seattle, they will be the wild card team. They'll be the number 5 seed. They can't fall further down than that. And it looks like, depending on how things go with Dallas next week, we'll probably playing Dallas in the first round. But the Cardinals, if they win the division, they could be the 2 or the number 3 seed. If the Rams lose, the Cardinals win. The Cardinals win the division, be a tiebreaker in division, and they will be ahead of the Cowboys because of their head-to-head win, but they will still trail the Buccaneers. So they will be the 3 seed unless Tampa Bay also loses to the Panthers. If they do that, the Cardinals would own the tiebreak over the Bucs via conference record. And so the Cardinals can't be number 1, they can't be number 4, but they can be 2, 3, or 5. Now, the question is, Seth, 1, do you believe in this team? Do you think that they can and will win the division this weekend?
Yeah, I do think they will. And the reason why is because I do think that they'll beat Seattle. Obviously, they've got to take care of their own business. But I think the desperate nature of how we're going to see San Francisco play this weekend, because San Francisco, I don't want to say they have to win, but they basically
it's pretty close because the Saints against the Falcons, you can't bank on the Falcons beating anyone.
Right. And so the 49ers basically have to win to make sure that they stay in the playoffs. And that's their goal this year, was to get to the playoffs and have a chance to compete. And you look at it now, without a win, they're probably not in. They've also just flat out had Sean McVay's number.
They've won the last 5 matchups against the Rams, which is crazy. It's crazy, but it's going to be interesting to see because the Rams did not play well last week.
No, they didn't, and quite frankly, I don't know if you can say they've played extremely well over the last several games. They've had games where they've looked great, and then they've had games where they look like they're still working out the kinks. And the fact that they barely beat a Baltimore team without their quarterback and a number of other players, the fact that they struggled against a Minnesota team, those are. But you know what? They've won 5 in a row, and I guess it doesn't matter how you win them as long as you win them. So we'll see how that works out.
But as good as Matthew Stafford is talent-wise, there is the big game effect on guys like him. Carson Palmer had the same rap, that in the biggest games, he wasn't the biggest player, which you kind of need your quarterback to be most of the time.
Correct. And so, you look at it, the reason, and I joke about this a lot, but it's really honestly not a joke, is the reason I always say, I'm taking Tampa Bay is, well, Tom Brady has proven it more than anybody else in the history of the game. Don't bet against Tom Brady, right? It's pretty simple. So from that perspective, you look at it, and that's one of the things that I look at is just that I'm not going to bet against Tom Brady. At the same time, I mean, let's be honest. As Cardinals fans in the playoffs, it was probably safe to bet against Carson Palmer, right? Like,
Right?
and I think right now you're to your point, you're still in that same spot with Matthew Stafford until he proves you otherwise. And so until that happens, you're still doing that. And so this is one of those games. Um, so I think that the Cardinals end up as the 3 seed. The reason I don't think they end up as the 2 seed is because, well, the Carolina Panthers are
They're done. I
completely
mean, they're
awful.
done.
Unless they're going to play the Cardinals again, in which case then I am
Jeez.
betting my house on the Panthers. But you know, I think ending up with the 3 seed. I mean, let's discuss it. Is that better than? So if you end up with the 3 seed, that means San Francisco won.
Yeah.
If San Francisco wins, they're guaranteed to stay at the 6 seed. So a really weird scenario, but San Francisco either ends up as the 6 seed or out of the playoffs, right? Like I don't quite understand all of it, but I guess all the tiebreakers.
So they're ahead of Philly because they beat Philly, but New
But if
Orleans
they're, yeah.
holds the other tiebreakers
So how is Philly clinched though? That's what I don't understand.
because I believe because they have the tiebreak over
New
New
Orleans.
Orleans.
Okay, so and then San Francisco would lose their tiebreaker to New Orleans and
Yeah,
then just be out.
right. They're number 6, or they could be number 8.
Right. See, and that's what I was confused about. Okay, so yeah, so San Francisco wins, they're number 6. If if they win and the Cardinals win, the Cardinals play San Francisco for the third time. Would you rather play San Francisco for the third time or go back to Dallas and play Dallas again in Dallas?
You know, I think I'd rather like I know the Cardinals have played better on the road. I think I think that you want to be at home. You
I
want to be at
agree.
home.
I agree 100% with you. I think
But it's super hard to beat a team 3 times in the same year.
it's incredibly hard, but it's also going to be really hard to beat a team for a second time on the road.
Right. Just 2 weeks
And
later.
I was going to say in 3 weeks, right? Like
I'm
the
all about, so like if I had a preference, I want the Cardinals to have the highest seed possible. When they
right,
win the
we would
division, they play at home. If they're number 2, then they got to play the Eagles. And I think playing the Eagles at home is, you know,
ideal,
ideal, honestly.
right?
And then you avoid playing Green Bay in the second round. You can play them in the NFC Championship game. But honestly, for me, the Cardinals need to get in however it is. I want them to win the division. I think what that does, it cements Cliff as solid. It proves that they exceeded expectations because, I expected a wild card team. 10 wins wild card, which they're pretty close to being. They exceeded expectations. They had players get hurt that we hoped wouldn't. But if they win the division, that's exceeded expectations. You get to play in that home atmosphere. The Cardinals, let's see, they've never lost a playoff game at State Farm Stadium.
Yeah,
As bad as they've been this year at home, the atmosphere in the playoffs, and I've been to one playoff game, and that was the Cardinals Packers game when Larry Fitzgerald got the touchdown. I never, even in the press box, have never experienced anything quite like that in terms of the energy on the field. It was amazing.
well, and you look at it. There's a couple things we talked about. It's going to be insane if they go 5-1 in the division and don't win it, right?
Right.
That's going to be nuts. And so you want to be rewarded for being the best team in the division, and if you go 5-1 in the division, you are the best team in the division. I mean, even if LA has a better record than you, that they weren't a better team in the division, they just happened to win more games outside the division. Um, so that's one. Two, yeah, you want to play as many games at home as possible. I'm always I just said it. I'm always betting on Tom Brady, but if you're going to catch Tom Brady, you want to catch him early in the playoffs, so wild card round. And so maybe Philly pulls an upset, right? I still would 100% bet on Tom Brady. I would expect Tampa to win the game, but that's how that's what you hope for. Uh, and like you said, then you stay because no matter what, unless Philly wins, because they reseed basically,
They
right?
do.
So like, okay, so unless right, so unless Philly wins, if you're the 5 seed, you're gonna play Green Bay. Um, and you probably don't feel super confident about that. And so same thing, you kind of want to put Green Bay off. I mean, so here's some crazy stats, right? So you and I were texting about this, and when do you want to catch somebody, so to speak? So you want Brady in the wild card round. That's his worst. He's 3-2. So, like I said, Tom Brady's ridiculous. You want to avoid Tom Brady in round two at all cost. He's 14-2. That's 16 games, folks. He's played an entire
Entire
season
season of divisional
of
round games.
divisional round football games.
Jeez.
And oh, by the way, he's thrown for just under 4,600 yards, 32 touchdowns, and only 11 interceptions.
He's had an all pro year in the divisional round in his career.
So, you know, you want to avoid that as much as possible. But on the flip side, Aaron Rodgers is 1-4 in conference championship games. So you don't want to see Rodgers before a conference championship game. You don't want to see Tom Brady at all. I mean, let's just be honest. Like, you want to avoid Tom Brady as much as possible. On the Cardinals did it to themselves. I mean, it's their fault that they're not going to have the 1 seed and avoid potential and force a Green Bay Tampa Bay showdown before the NFC Championship game. So now you've got to win a game, and so it's either going to be in Tampa or Green Bay. I mean, yeah, maybe you get some help, and maybe you end up, maybe you end up the 3 seed, right? And you play San Francisco and you win. You take care of your business. That's all you can worry about. And then Philly upset. So now all of a sudden you get the winner of LA Dallas. So you get to host LA or Dallas. Okay, that's great. You're still going to have to end up going to Green Bay. I mean, even on a great day, I'm not taking San Francisco in Green Bay over Green Bay.
No.
I mean, at that point, you just need to take care of your business. I mean, we can always hope and pray that Carolina has like one really good game left in them, or they're confused by the red uniforms and they think they're playing the Cardinals and they play really well. But I mean, for the most part, you look at it, it feels like you take care of your business on Sunday. I think they're going to end up the 3 seed, and then they're going to have to take care of business again against San Francisco. So they're going to have to beat them for a third time, which is going to be a tall task.
But I think they can do it because San Francisco's, they're a flawed team. They're a flawed team, and there's a reason why they've been up and down. Jimmy Garoppolo, whether it's Jimmy Garoppolo or Trey Lance, Jimmy Garoppolo's not 100%. We saw what the Cardinals were able to do to Trey Lance defensively, and now they've got film on him. So, you like your chances against them because, yeah, they've done it before, and they're not going to take them lightly.
Yep. And so, I mean, the Cardinals were in the driver's seat 3 weeks ago, or I guess it was 4 weeks ago. And, they fell out of it, and now it's on them to come back and figure out, a way to win no matter where they're seated. And unfortunately, they do not control their own destiny. So they're going to have to come out and they're going to have to play whoever stands in front of them. And we can hope and want for the best scenario, but overall, it's going to just end up being kind of is what it is, unfortunately, and they're going to have to figure it out. But I do think they end up as the 3 seed.
Coming up next on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. We come back to wrap it up, and we will talk about their Week 18 season finale, regular season finale against the Seattle-Seahawks at home. Break it down, make our preview, make our predictions. That's coming next on Rise Up Sea Red. We're back on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk. And then the Cardinals end the season at home for the first time in years, because the Week 17 always falls in the Fiesta Bowl weekend, the Fiesta Bowl week, so the Cardinals can never play at home. They get to close the season at home for the first time in I don't know how long. And so they get to close the season at home against the Seahawks. You know, this is not going to be an easy game. The Cardinals have only beaten the Seahawks twice since 2012. They did it last year. They did it in Russell Wilson's debut. Those are the only 2 wins that they've had over the Seahawks at State Farm Stadium. It's really kind of pathetic. That said, the Seahawks have a couple of very big defensive injuries. Bobby Wagner, it's unknown whether he'll be able to play next week, or Carlos Dunlap, 2 of their best defensive players. And they put up 51 points on the lines this last weekend. Rashad Penny is playing out of his mind at running back. He's looking like the back that we both thought he would be, right? That's what we thought he was going to be when he came out of San Diego State.
Yeah, and then he tore up his knee again, right? Was it his knee or his Achilles? I think he got hurt.
Did he get hurt this last weekend? Oh my gosh.
No. I meant like early in his career.
Maybe. Yeah, he's dealt with injuries pretty much the entire time he's been in the league.
And so it's nice to see him healthy again, and just playing well. But it's also a concern, right? I mean, let's be honest. You and I have talked about it before, and if the Cardinals don't get out to that fast start, he's a guy that can really dole out punishment and really just make things difficult. I think he had 150 yards through the first half.
Holy cow. He's had over 100. He had 170 and 2 touchdowns last week. 3 of his last 4 games. In the last 4 games, he's got 5 touchdowns, and 3 of them he's had at least 130 yards on the ground. That's mad production.
Yeah, and so he did tear his ACL in 2019. That's what I thought. And so, yeah, you look at it, he's playing at a high level. He's a physical downhill runner. He obviously is going to praise himself highly, but he comps his style to Adrian Peterson, and you can see that. Like, he likes to run through people as opposed to trying to run around them, and he's a physical guy. All that being said, Seattle's not been great still.
No, they haven't.
And they got a 3 touchdown game from DK Metcalf last week against I guess we're one to talk, right? But a bad Lions team. And you look at it, but they've been struggling offensively off and on. When they win games, they're putting up over 400 yards of offense. When they lose games,
they're struggling. My goodness.
Yeah, like barely getting to 300 yards of offense. I mean, you look at their losses. They lost to the Bears 331 yards.
They've got 219, 229, 208, 266, 267, and the 229 was in a win over the Jaguars.
Yeah. And so you just look at it. They're just they're just a team that there's a reason that they're 6-10. But you look at when they're on, and yeah, they're against bad teams, but when they're on against Houston, they go for 450 yards and 33 points. When they're on against Detroit, they go for 497 yards and 51 points. But it's just been few and far between for this team to be on since week 4.
Right, and the honestly, aside from the time when Russ wasn't playing well and when he was out, the defense hasn't been that great. They give up a lot of yards and don't give up a lot of points, but against a team like the Cardinals should have had 30 points in that game in Seattle, but thanks to bad kicks, It was only 23. They should have had 30. And so defensively, this is a team that, and it's one of those cases. The only team, honestly, that can stop the Cardinals is the Cardinals. If they're staying on schedule, they can't stop. Their scheme and their talent is too good. So if they stay on schedule, the only teams that really beat them is them, or if they've got a guy that can really cause problems with big negative sacks.
Yeah, and so you look at it, like you said, they've had some porous defensive performances this year, and realistically, they haven't had a good defensive performance since they last played Houston. I mean, even against the woeful Lions, they didn't play well defensively. Against the Bears, they didn't play well defensively. They made the game against the Rams ugly, but they didn't play well. And so you just look at it, they're just not a team that is built to play catch up because their defense hasn't been good enough all season to allow them to catch up. They're kind of an extreme version of the Cardinals, right? They're a front running team. If they get out and get ahead with Rashad Penny, they like to run the ball, get downhill, and then their defense can play fast and aggressive and take shots. But they just haven't had very much luck being able to do that. I will say this: they've done well over the past about 5 games in stopping the run, so that'll be something to watch. I mean, they gave up 123 to the Rams, but sandwiched in between those, they only gave up 71, 63, and then 88 and 95. So the big thing for this team, and I mean, you can say with every team, but especially this Seattle team, is they thrive off of turnovers. The games that they win, they cause turnovers. The games that they lose, they're not able to win the turnover battle. And you just, when you go back to the Cardinals game, Cardinals didn't turn the ball over. They didn't force any turnovers, but they didn't turn the ball over. And that's a big thing. When they beat San Francisco in week, what was that, 13, to kind of have that sliver of hope left, they forced 3 turnovers. When they beat Detroit this last weekend, they forced 3 turnovers. Like, those games are the ones they win. When the turnover battle's even or they're negative, it's tough for them to win games just because they lack talent along the offensive line and then especially on the defensive side of the ball.
The matchups that I worry about, one is Tyler Lockett. Byron Murphy's kind of struggled the last few weeks, and Tyler Lockett has had some huge games against the Cardinals. Rashad Penny's a guy to watch. But the Cardinals, they're so if they stay solid defensively, disciplined defensively, they should get stopped early. As long as they put points on the board, they can mitigate that. That's what we've been saying all year. They're good at stopping the run in spurts, and then they don't have to stop the run because they're no longer doing it.
Right, and that's what is important and kind of imperative. This is going to be a tough week. I mean, we thought last week was going to be as well, and listening to your show, you and Blake talked about the wide receivers threats that the Cowboys have, and this was going to be the Cardinals' real first test without Marco and Robert Alford, and I think that they passed it for the most part.
Yeah, Kevin Peterson played well. Like, it wasn't great every time, but like, I know you've been a Kevin Peterson fan for a while, but he definitely held up. Antonio Hamilton, had the one penalty, but
he did enough. Yeah, he was, and
they're getting enough, and there's a reason why Vance Joseph is dropping more into coverage because he wants to protect his D-backs, his defensive backs, who are, they're not his starters.
They're not great. I mean, they're depth guys or practice squad guys playing up as depth guys now.
Right.
And so when you look at it from that perspective, it's going to be a concern until it's not. And it'll be a concern again this week with DK Metcalf and, like you said, Tyler Lockett because of Murph's struggles. But, they should be up to the challenge. You would expect them to, with what's on the line, be up to the challenge and getting, giving themselves the best chance to have the best seed in the playoffs that they can.
How do you see this game?
Especially with, LA and San Francisco playing at the same time.
Right. There's no reason to focus on anything else other than you've got the Seahawks in front of you. Now, I think this game, the Cardinals pretty much control. The Seahawks will probably threaten at some point, but I've got them taking this game fairly easily, 27-16. How do you see this playing out?
I was going to go 27-17, so I'll switch it up and I will say 31-20.
Ooh, that's a fun one. That's absolutely it. So, with that, we will end this edition of the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best our Cardinals talk on the web, and we'll be talking about the playoffs next week. Absolutely, as we look ahead to the postseason. Seth and I will be back next Tuesday night, so you'll get the recording. You'll have this hit your inbox or your podcast or your player, however you do that, Wednesday morning to Wednesday afternoon or evening. With that, that's Seth Cox. I'm Jess Root. This is the Rise Up Sea Red podcast. Thanks for listening. We'll be back again next week.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up Sea Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red Sea Red, and of course, Rise Up Sea Red.